Berlin in the imagination of many is a city of freedom, creativity and opportunity. A place where you can start again. A place where painful history has been replaced by an open future. It's Berlin that appears on postcards, on promotional campaigns, on the stories we still tell each other. But every city has two sides, and Berlin is no exception. Only thing is, you'll never see this other side on any travel site. These are residential areas where tents stretch along the sidewalk, surrounded by piles of trash, piled as high as a person's body. No one cleans it. No one asks. These are children who grow up without ever knowing what it feels like to sleep in a proper bed. Cushions are a luxury, not a basic item. And those are very young people, walking around in broad daylight, eyes blank, can put their backs down anywhere. Stone benches, steps, even in the middle of the aisle as if this city had no more room for them to stand. Berlin remains a wealthy city, but the question is, who is rich for and who is forgotten? In this video, we'll go inside Germany's emerging poverty hotspots, and the starting point is Berlin. Berlin today is not an all-round poor city. There are still vibrant neighborhoods, crowded cafes, and office buildings that light up until late, seen from above. Berlin still has the appearance of a modern and dynamic European capital. But if you slow down, if you turn off familiar routes, start to realize something else. Poverty in Berlin doesn't spread evenly, it concentrates, like cracks on a large glass panel. Not everywhere breaks, but once it cracks into patches. Marzahn-Hellersdorf district. An area often referred to as a symbol of social inequality in Germany. Nearly 300,000 people live here. And by 2023, 18.1% of the population is threatened by poverty, higher than the national average. The Holberg family is one of them. Pierre Holberg lives with his wife, 4 children and mother-in-law in an apartment of less than 90 square meters. The family of 6's daily eating budget is only about €10. Mrs. Evi, mother-in-law Pierre, lives in the same house and is the silent breadwinner of the whole family. Escalating prices made already struggling lives even more suffocating. 1 cucumber costs more than €1. A few vegetables to juice a husband with cancer costs up to €35. With Evi, it's not just inflation, it's the feeling of being left behind. The whole family is currently only looking forward to a subsidy of about €3,600 per month for 6 people, which sounds big. But after a rent of nearly €1,000 and fixed costs, they have almost no room for any event. In Neukölln and Wedding, close quarters, small shops follow small shops. In the morning, people line up in front of the discount bakery. In the afternoon, baby strollers and strollers crowded the narrow sidewalk. Life here doesn't collapse. It's compressed. A woman living in the Wedding area shared, "We are not hungry." But there is no surplus either. Every month is a calculation. With just one unexpected bill, everything is immediately stressful. The figures often referred to in the social report sound abstract. A higher than average proportion of people at risk of poverty. An earlier proportion of young people leaving school. A steady increase in the number of people without a place to stay year by year. But those numbers don't live on paper. They live in real life. It's about 3 generations living in an apartment that was designed for 2. Children do their homework on the kitchen table because they don't have their own room. Parents always have to say the familiar saying, "Let's wait until next month." A middle-aged man in Marzahn-Hellersdorf said very quietly, "I have a job. I go to work every day, but it feels like I'm just standing still, while everything around me is getting more and more expensive." It is worth noting that, in these areas, poverty does not have a dramatic face. Not everyone is unemployed. Not everyone needs emergency relief. What people lack the most is a safety buffer. Buffer for getting sick without fear of bills. Buffer space for children to learn more when needed. A buffer so that an event does not become a turning point in a lifetime. And precisely because poverty appears in that quiet way, it is easily overlooked. Until multiple families fall into the same situation at the same time, in the same area, in the same structure, Berlin remains a city of opportunity. But those opportunities are no longer spread evenly across the map. They shrink, concentrate, and leave behind increasingly clear gaps. Perhaps the question is not, is Berlin poor? It's, how many people are living right next to the boundary of uncertainty? And you, what do you think? Is this a Berlin problem? Or is it an early sign of what many other European cities will eventually face? If these questions stop you from thinking, subscribe to the channel not to support any individual, but to continue this conversation calmly and frankly. And to understand that, we need to listen more carefully to very everyday stories where poverty is not named, but is present in every daily choice. In the next section, we will go into such stories. In Berlin's emerging poverty hotspots, poverty does not always carry an image of despair. It often has the appearance of very ordinary families. Jessica Lau, single mother, has 2 vocational degrees, works full-time, but her net income of €1,418 per month is lower than when she lived on social assistance. She had to calculate every penny, withdraw exactly €150 per week for spending, hunt for promotions, compare prices between supermarkets. Working makes her poorer financially, but richer in dignity and example for her children. Her son, Alex, studies well, plays sports, and wants to join the army. He realized a bitter truth. When children see that their parents don't work and still have money, they will wonder, so why should I try? It is not an exaggeration to say that, where the European promise is most clearly tested, it is children. Statistics show that almost 14% of adolescents in Hellersdorf leave school without a diploma. For many children, poverty is not just a lack of material things, but a lack of quiet space to study, a lack of mentors, a lack of faith that efforts will be rewarded. Joshua is a smart but difficult to concentrate boy who only has a bunk bed as his own space to study. Parents don't have enough time to support, not because they are lazy, but because they are exhausted to maintain their lives. And Celine, who is only 14 but often has to leave school. At 16, Leah has just failed her junior high school diploma and is studying a vocational preparation program. She is the 3rd generation of the family to grow up in poverty. It can be seen that poverty not only deprives children of money, but also of dignity, hope, and opportunity, even in a wealthy capital like Berlin. A child doesn't need big dreams. It just needs a table that is still enough to do the homework. But when the whole family lives in a state of prolonged stress, even those little things become difficult to keep. It's worth noting that, in these stories, no one blames anyone. People here do not talk about policy in heavy words. They talk about life experiences. A father shared, "I did exactly what society asked me to do. Go to work, contribute, raise children, but I'm not sure my child will have more opportunities than me." That statement touches on a worry that is very familiar to middle-aged European audiences. Not the immediate fear of poverty, but the fear of standing still for generations. Because the greatest promise society has ever made is not wealth, but progress. That each generation will have a better starting point than the previous generation. And when that promise begins to waver, poverty is no longer a matter of money. It becomes a question of justice and the future. What do you think? if a hard-working family is still just enough to stay in place? Where does the problem lie? Is this an isolated experience or a sign of something bigger going on in European cities? If these stories make you realize something familiar, subscribe to the channel not to hear available answers, but to continue asking the necessary questions together. Because to understand why promises are no longer enough, we need to look beyond the scope of each family to see public spaces where poverty is starting to appear more clearly. And that's where we're going in the next part. When leaving cramped apartments and stepping out into public spaces, poverty in Berlin is no longer a story behind closed doors. It appeared before my eyes in a very everyday way. Around the major stations, there was a constant flow of people in the morning. The trains are full of people going to work. In the afternoon, the rhythm slows down and gaps begin to appear. On the steps, some people sat and rested for a long time. No rush. It's unclear whether they're waiting for the train or waiting something else. Some people carry neat bags. Some people only have a small backpack. They don't attract attention. They blend into the scene to the point of becoming invisible. In squares and common areas, children play in small courtyards. Adults sit on benches, chat briefly, and have reservations. No one complained loudly. Nobody's telling. One man said, "I have temporary accommodation. I don't sleep outdoors, but I don't know how long I will be there. Everything is like temporary." Stretched. That statement reflects a familiar reality in many new poverty hotspots. Short-term stability replaces the long-term future. Berlin has social support centers that operate regularly. In the morning, people lined up in order, get advice, get the necessary support. These places are not chaotic. On the contrary, they operate very efficiently. And that's what makes poverty here less shocking, but more persistent. A woman who used to work in the retail industry shared, "Thanks for help. I didn't fall, but I didn't see myself climbing either. I'm still in that right place, year after year. Welfare was created to be the ladder. But if the ladder is not high enough, people just stand still, does not fall, but also does not go up." In these areas, you will meet poor workers who have jobs, hours, responsibilities. But income is not enough to overcome the rising cost of living. They move between home, work, and familiar public spaces. Their lives do not collapse, but do not expand. When such experiences repeat in the same area, they form hotspots not because of violence or chaos, but because of prolonged uncertainty. Poverty hotspots are not places where everything is bad, which is where everything is just enough to survive, but not enough to move forward. And because of that, they are easily overlooked in the overall picture of a rich city. But for the people who live there, every day is a familiar problem. How to maintain balance. Do you realize this? That poverty today rarely appears as a big shock, but rather as a slight but constant pull, pulling life towards the lower, bit by bit. If you are following these stories and find them familiar, subscribe to the channel not to hear the available conclusion, but to keep observing, asking questions, and contrasting with the city in which you live, and with the Europe we share. Because when hotspots are already before your eyes. The next question is no longer whether they exist or are wise. There is a promise that has shaped European society for decades, not the promise of superior wealth, but the promise of well-being, opportunity and dignity. That if you work, society will not abandon you, that if you encounter an incident, there will be a network to support it. That your children, at least, will have a starting point no lower than yours. It is a promise that has helped generations accept contributions, obey the rules, and trust the system. But as we pass through the emerging poverty hotspots in Berlin today, that promise does not disappear. It becomes blurred. In Marzahn-Hellersdorf, an older woman said, "I don't need much. Just know that things will get better for your children and grandchildren." That statement sounds simple, but that simplicity shows the gap between expectations and experiences. Because poverty in Berlin today is rarely absolute deprivation. It is the feeling of standing still in a moving society. It's like standing on a conveyor belt running in the opposite direction you still walk. But the scene ahead does not change. The numbers often cited to describe poverty sound remote. But try converting them into familiar images. A family having to consider each bill at the end of the month. A worker who doesn't dare take sick leave for fear of lack of income. A good child who doesn't have the means to study more when needed. That's when security becomes risk management, not leverage to move forward. No one demands wealth. People only demand a road with an exit. This is the point that makes many middle-aged European audiences stop thinking because they realize a familiar worry, not today, but tomorrow for their children. When societies are so wealthy that they can ensure a minimum standard of living, but have difficulty creating social mobility, the question is no longer whether the budget is enough. It's what the structure is prioritizing. Are we protecting people or are we just managing poverty effectively? In Berlin, poverty hotspots do not appear because of a lack of personal effort. They form when the cost of living grows faster than income, when housing becomes a long-term pressure, and when safety buffers thin. What do you think? If a society can help people survive, but has difficulty helping them move forward, where does the problem lie? And if the children of hard-working families still start with fewer options than the previous generation? What does that society's wealth mean? Among areas where poverty is gradually emerging, Berlin is not just about cracks. There still exist small fulcrum points. No noise, not the appearance of a big solution, but enough to keep people from slipping any further. In a community centre at Wedding, a small room is used as an afternoon class. Tables and chairs are not synchronized. Walls hang paintings painted with wax pens. No one calls this place a lifesaver. It is simply a place for children to sit still. In Marzahn-Hellersdorf, a man who had been receiving social assistance for many years now returns to the local centre in a part-time support role. He doesn't talk about success. I'm just talking about stability. Someone helped me when I needed it. Now I just do it again for someone else. Such stories do not appear on the front page. They don't produce impressive numbers, but they slow down the free fall process. The system may be slow, but people are still holding each other together. In poor neighborhoods, teachers, social support workers, older neighbors, and even people who have experienced hardship are silently patching up gaps that large structures have not yet reached. Not with big promises, but by regular presence. The question is not, are these small efforts enough? It's, what if even those little lights were gone? Because after these small fulcrum points, one final question remains to be asked. What are we going to do with all that has been seen? And that's where our story closes. Berlin is not a city that has lost hope, but what we just saw shows that hope is no longer evenly distributed. Poverty hotspots are emerging not because people stop trying, but because the promise of opportunity and progress is becoming more fragile for many ordinary families. This video is not intended to criticize any individual or community, nor does it provide a simple answer to a complex problem. Our aim is only to ask questions from everyday stories in a calm and respectful dialogue space. In your opinion, what is making more and more people feel like they are just standing still in a rich society? Is this Berlin's own story, or an early sign of what many other European cities are also facing? Please share your perspective in the comments section. And if you are interested in deep, slow, and frank conversations about European society today, subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing to observe, listen, and reflect. The content in the video is built from public material, interviews and social observations for information and discussion purposes. All views expressed do not represent any particular organization or individual and are not intended to incite, attribute, or attack any group of people. Thank you for staying until the end. The conversation only really starts here.